What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Out of the Shadows. Joining me again on this podcast is my brother Tullio.
Hi, good to see everybody.
We're actually going to do something a little different this time. We're going to do both of our reactions to a podcast by Jocko Willink, who's very, famous in terms of, I'd say, motivational stuff, to kind of put it generically. But we both had different reactions to this, and we're going to kind of get into people's different coaching styles and how different people react to different styles and what's beneficial, what's not, that sort of thing. So, Tullio, if you want to get us started, because I know you sent this to me. So I know you listen to Jocko obviously a lot more than I have. I've only really listened to this. Like, what do you like about him in general, I guess?
I think you always, as most things I'm aware of, discovered him first on Joe Rogan. It was actually before he had a podcast. Joe Rogan was the one that convinced him to have a podcast. He was on Joe Rogan because he had already had his first book, I believe, out. His story is he's a former Navy SEAL team leader. And when he was done with his service, he and another one of his members from his SEAL team started a consulting firm. And then they went in and they do like motivational speeches and a lot of business consulting. His books are phenomenal. I can't recommend his books enough, whether the first one's called Extreme Ownership. The Dichotomy of Leadership is the second one. And then like the Tactics and something else. I don't know. If you just Google them, you'll find all of his books, but they're all great books. And especially I was really impressed. Extreme Ownership is broken down where it's got a war story from Ramadi, Iraq, and then a real life business situation that he encountered in his consulting business, and then how the principle from the war story is carried over into the real world in a business setting. And you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be for business, like you can do it just in your everyday life or whatever. It's just really well done and a really good like perspective on things. So his podcast, he has different people on. He does a lot of like motivational things. His Instagram's pretty famous. It's usually just a picture of his watch. It's approximately 4:30 a.m. and it'll just say something like, get after it or get some or whatever. He gets up at 4:30 in the morning usually. He'll post that, and then I'll post a picture of a puddle of sweat on the floor. And that'll usually have the caption, aftermath. So that's sort of like his thing. He doesn't usually like post a lot. That's normally like his daily postings. And it's just, like motivational, whatever, like get up and kind of do it sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I will say, one, just so I remember to reference this while we're talking, we're specifically going to be talking about Jocko Podcast 226, or at least a very early portion of it.
Now, right, and that is all him. The last book that he put out, and I didn't write the name down, but it just came out like a week or two ago, and there is no audio book. All of his other books have audio. There's an audio version of it where Jocko himself is reading it. This one does not, but the podcast is him reading the book. The book's only like 90 pages or something, I think. So the podcast is about 2.5 hours. It's him and oh my God, I feel horrible, but I can't remember the other guy's name. Dave something. He's a Marine. They like co-wrote the book with Jocko because it was a reference to a podcast that they did like a year ago. They got a bunch of response and, people messaging him about it, wanted more information.
Yeah. So, I can say even from what I've seen and then what you've told me about him and, Mike, who's been on here before, like is a fan of Jocko Willink as well. A lot of people are. He's got a pretty big following. The principles I think are great. I don't dismiss any of that. I think his content is awesome. It's just, so originally our plan was, we had been discussing before the last time that we filmed, Tullio started telling me about this podcast and all these, things that it entailed and these principles and what they talked about in terms of motivation and things of that nature. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we'll totally talk about all that stuff. And then we decided what the plan was that I would go back, watch the entire podcast, and we'd both just kind of discuss our different perspectives, what we liked about it, that sort of thing. And when I watched it, to be completely honest, I just immediately was like, no, I don't want to do this. And again, it's not, the content is good, but just his particular style, it's kind of, I don't even know exactly how to put this, but it's a bit more aggressive. It's kind of that mentality of where, like, if you were to have, a martial arts coach or something like that, it'd be that mentality of like, come on, keep going, don't stop, that kind of thing, like really aggressive in your face. And to me personally, I will do that with self-talk sometimes. Like if I'm working out, like I'll, get aggressive in my head. But for me, if someone is teaching me, I respond much better to encouragement and a softer approach, shall we say. So I dedicated myself to watching at least 15 minutes because I try to give everything at least a fair shake before I just decide, oh, no, this isn't for me. So this is just going to kind of be a back and forth as to how we both respond to it differently and how I think people in general can respond to it differently. So like I said, that style to me tends to turn me off. Is that like the main style that you would say you'd go for, Tullio, or like what's appealing about it to you?
Both. You know what I mean? Like as far as styles, like sometimes I do like it. It depends on who's doing it. For the tough love is kind of how I look at it, sort of like approach or coaching style. So I need to, if I believe that it is coming from that sort of mentality, where like they really truly do want you to get better, and do better, and it's not just an aggressive person yelling at you. You know what I mean? Like to me, there's a huge difference between like I don't like the idea of being bullied at all. And I think that just the intention would make the difference and the distinction. So yes, and certain things I do, like Jocko, I love Jocko, and he doesn't always do that. And that's what I'm really interested in seeing this because I went back and originally I watched the entire 2.5 hours, and I said this was I watched like 2 out of the 2.5 hours, and I'm like, I'm going to finish it. This is fucking awesome. Watch it. We'll just compare notes, see like what jumps out at both of us, and then. I know like that Jocko can have that sort of aggressive, tough love kind of style. So when you said the 15 minutes, I went back and just rewatched the first 16. I think you said it was like 15 minutes and 40 seconds or something exactly.
Yeah.
And I was really, I'm really interested to see your perspective because there was like one thing where he mentioned, like kind of casually mentioned that somebody told him that he broke up with his girlfriend and he kind of like blew it off in a way, sort of. But at the end, he actually gives phenomenal advice because there is a part of the book towards the end that talks about relationships, and it's really it's well written, and I think it's well spoken at the end of it. But I didn't think in those first 15 minutes that there was that he even was being like aggressive in the coaching style. So it just depends. You know what I mean? I do like the tough love style sometimes from Jocko. Mike Dolce does the same thing, who I know personally. He used to have his gym here. That's where he used to work out for my strength and conditioning with Adrian. So I actually know Mike Dolce personally. He does a lot of those too. He'll just start yelling and screaming and swearing at people on his YouTube channel. But he'll like give a warning, like this is going to be tough love. So if you're not up for this, don't watch this one. Skip this one, and then there's other ones, other times too, like Joe Rogan, it's super famous clip, and they're just YouTube little highlights of his Be Your Own Hero speech, where he's like, imagine yourself in a movie and, whatever. And, like, it's a much more friendly sort of subtle motivation kind of, you know what I mean? Not like an in your face kind of motivation. So both approaches I think can be beneficial depending on the source, the intent, the timing of it, of course,
Yeah.
in the situation.
No, and I agree. And like you said, it's a good point. Like he doesn't say anything particularly aggressive. It's not like in those first 15 minutes, they're talking about someone with a problem. And he's like, oh, this guy's being a pussy or something. Like, it's not like that at all. It was kind of the vibe I got. I was just like, I can tell this is going to be one of those David Goggin-esque type, like, all right, this is what we do and this is how we do it. And you're very right in terms of the intention and, you know, what they're actually trying to do. There's, I agree, a big difference between bullying and trying to motivate and tough love and that sort of thing. And like David Goggins, for example, not a huge fan just in terms of, again, it's a different style. And he's obviously very aggressive sometimes. But I did really like with him in particular when he talked about the Rocky movies and those inspiring him, because anyone who watches my content knows I love Rocky. But yeah, no, you're right. There wasn't anything specific where like he was being, you know, distributing tough love on somebody in particular. It was just kind of this feeling I got, and to me, I was like, this is just not going to be my vibe. So that's kind of what turned me off from it.
Yeah. And I mean, just so that the audio, what was it again? Was it 226 or 226? Yeah. Jocko podcast 226 is one we're referring to. The basics of it is the book that he did. He was telling a story on a podcast a year ago with the same Marine guest that's on the 226. I think it was 170. They mentioned it right away. But he was telling a story about when Jocko was the Navy SEAL team leader, and their scoring system or grading scale or whatever is, I think, a 0 through 5. 5 is the best score. So somebody, Jocko graded everybody. He said somebody was, like a good average guy. It was like, he said his average was like 3.6 or 3.8 or something. He said it's really solid performer. So the guy scheduled a meeting with him to ask why that was his score. So Jocko went through and read the definition of what all the scores were. And 5 is like perfection. And that's what it was. And then the Marine guy that he had on, they also went over the Marine manual, which was similar. And actually, I think, had even like higher standards in certain things. And again, it was almost like pretty much perfection and for the most part unattainable. So I think that kind of like it would just be sort of maybe like the interpretation of the initial part of the podcast, when he's reading it, because he's sort of reading it. I could see how somebody could sort of take it as like maybe arrogant kind of in a way, but I don't, I didn't see it like that. And I know from, if you finish the podcast, it's not that he's saying, like, you're not a 5. He's reading it and saying that it is pretty much an impossibility to reach that. And then the whole thing is that you structure whatever it is that you're doing in your life towards attempting to achieve something that is inachievable. And in that process, you better yourself. And you know what I mean? You can't ever really reach perfection, but you attempt to. And in the attempt of doing it, you can be the best that you can be. And they even go over, like you're never going to have, so like a 5 is pretty much, you're aiming for a 5 always, in their terms of like the workout, like that's a possibility. Because, like his definition for like working out in a 5 is like, like you set your best record. You literally like feel like you're going to pass out, like you got to lay there and just, gasp for air at the end or whatever. You could physically push yourself as far as you can. But like just about everything else, like I said, a 5 is almost unattainable. But in the process of going for a 5, you could do a 3.5 or a 4. And sometimes, they say too, like if you may not feel like doing anything at all. So if you can only do a 1, if the best you can do is 1, then for you that day at that moment, that is a 5. So like when, you often refer to when, like you're in a really deep depression and you don't want to get out of bed. So the goal may be just sit up, right? Like in a normal day, on a normal scale, that would probably be a 0 because it would be like what I mean? Obviously you wake up, you sit up, you have to, like getting out of bed would be as most basic of a function as, there is. But if you're in a bad enough spot, that could be your 5 for the day. You know what I mean? It's not 5, but that's the best you could do that day, so you just do what you can. And that's if you go through the whole podcast, all the different things. They talk about everything. They talk about, like physical, like working out, career, relationships, diet, like you can apply it to literally anything in life. And that's what they say too, is like he reads the exact, like the Marine standards, the Navy standards, but he says like you kind of write your own, you know what I mean? Like you just make whatever the goal is, you personalize it for yourself. It's kind of like an outline of how to go about it is the point of the book. And they get more detail, like I said, as it goes on. And the podcast is like 2 hours and 35 minutes, I think, or something. So there's a lot more to it, and they get more detailed about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like you said, being able to take that standard and, like you say, just kind of applying it to life in general, in that you're aiming towards something that's inachievable if you're going for a perfect score in anything, hypothetically. But the more we're talking about this, I think another thing I remember that happened, and I was just kind of like, yeah, this just isn't something that I can personally relate to. I believe it was when he was talking about a guy who, like you said, he had like about a 3 or so score, which is good. And he was wondering, he's like, well, why didn't I get a 5? And they started talking about his, people in general. He's like, oh, you remember being 22 and like you think you could take on the world and like you think you're awesome. And it's not uncommon, I'm sure, for guys who are, into sports, and especially, in the Army and the Navy SEALs and the Marines especially. But just hearing that, like, I always had so much trouble with confidence, and I never had that, like, oh, I'm the best, I can take on anything. And like, I never needed to be put in check. So I was like, I just feel like this particular content isn't going to relate to me very well. And moreover, just, with my videos on this channel in general, what I try and do is, when I'm talking to people who are likely dealing with depression or anxiety or both commonly, to me anyway, in my experience, and what I've had other people tell me who've had similar experiences, that you're in such a bad place and your confidence is so low. My approach is always to be kind of a bit more gentle and more like, all right, well, I'm gonna build this person up, and I know they're afraid to do something. Like something that maybe, you and I have had this discussion. Something can be the best decision for you in life in general, no matter who you are, whether you have a mental health issue or not. You get offered a new job, and immediately you're excited, but you're like, oh my God, this is going to be terrifying. I got to leave the job that I know, all this stuff. And, I think for some people, their go-to might just be that, like, hey man, suck it up, man up, get it done. And for me, even my own internal dialogue in that situation, I would have to be a little bit more kind of even keel, where I'd be like, all right, you're afraid. You're supposed to be afraid. That's normal. You can do this. You're going to do this. So let's move forward. So coming full circle, my long explanation here is that, like I said, for me personally, I've never been in a position to where I was overly confident and needed to be put in check. So that was another aspect of the podcast where I'm like, this isn't going to really speak to me. I've always been that person who needed bolstering, which I think would correlate with my preference for a more supportive as opposed to a tough love style.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, see, that's why, like I said, this is interesting. And I thought that this was an even better idea when you told me like you could make it through through the podcast, just to see the different perspectives, because I saw it as him doing exactly that. Like he took the meeting with the guy and he explained to him, like if he could have just said, you know what, fuck off. You got what you got. That's what you are. Get out of here. And that's not what he did. And it's not how I saw. And I don't think I'm just about positive that because I do listen to him. I haven't seen every episode of his podcast. I have listened to the books. I know enough about him, know that I believe that what he was doing was saying, and I think maybe just he's such a big presence and personality that he seems kind of like, even when he is being soft-hearted, that it still seems sort of like intimidating. I think he's just like a presence. I know he's a big person. He's like, over 6 feet tall. He's like 250 pounds. He's a big, strong guy. He's been doing jiu-jitsu for like 20 years, Navy SEAL. So I think even when he's trying to be like calm and timid, he's still such a big presence. But to me, the way that I saw it, and I believe what the intentions were was to take somebody that, you know, maybe not overconfident, and say, like, it's okay, try it, because nobody can do it. You know what I mean? Like, nobody's achieving perfection. So, you know what I mean? Like, if you were the overconfident person, then, like you said, you need to be checked and be like, listen, just relax, because you can't, you know what I mean? Like, no, you're not perfect. Don't think you're perfect. But to me, the other perspective of that, and I think what the intent was to tell people that don't, you know, that thought like, well, there's no way I could ever be a 5, so I'm not even gonna try. Is that the message was, nobody's a 5. Nobody gets there. So you do your best. And, you know, like the other, you know, like little famous saying or whatever, you know, in the motivational world, and I don't know where, I heard it, of course, like everything else, first from Joe Rogan. I don't know where it originated, but the better than yesterday. You know, you just, you're only competition. The only standard or your bar that you should have for yourself is yourself. You know, and you just try to improve. You just try to be better than you were yesterday. You know, you just try to, and it doesn't have to be literally 24 hours ago. You know what I mean? Like you said, everybody's bad days. Everybody's going to have a day where they don't want to, you know, like actually most of last week, I don't even know why, but it would take me 20 to 30 minutes just to talk myself into working out. I enjoy working out usually. I love how I feel afterwards. I know I feel like shit when I don't, but I still just kind of didn't really want to. You know, I haven't been sleeping great, probably just because the sky's falling on all of our heads as we speak. You know, with me, I got the strip in the background. I'm in Vegas, but I work there. I have no idea what the future holds. You know what I mean? Like, this is, even as like, you know, level-headed and even keeled and, you know, optimistic kind of person I am and fighter, like, you know, it's scary. But you know, so I mean, like I said, like yesterday doesn't have to be literally the day before, but just, you know what I mean? You want to constantly just make some sort of progress, you know, even if every once in a while you got to stand still and catch your breath before you start again on the, you know, road of progress. Even, you know, like we both know and always say and agree, small, you know, small progress or slow progress is still progress, you know, and that's what I believe the whole actual message of it is, you know, and that's Jocko's whole thing, is just like, you know, you can better yourself. You know, it's not perfection. You know, he doesn't tell everybody that if you don't get up at 4:30 in the morning, you're a loser. You know what I mean? Like, that's not his message. You know, and I mean, he said too, because sometimes he talks about that, where people be like, well, what time you go to sleep? You know, sleep's important. And he says, yes, sleep is important, and different people need different sleep. You know, so he's like, I'm not telling everybody get up, you know, barely sleep and get up at 4:30 a.m. If you're going to bed at midnight, you shouldn't be getting up at 4:30 in the morning for sure. You know, and I mean, stuff like that. So I saw it more as like him saying, it's okay. Still do what you can. You know what I mean? Like, follow me, come down, you know, the path, as he calls it. You know, like, you can still, your path isn't going to be the same as my path. We can have the same end goal, but just because you don't feel confident you can reach it, and the guy next to you feels confident he's going to surpass it, in reality, nobody's getting there. You know what I mean? And in a lot of ways, I think you're better off without being the overconfident person, because the overconfident person is going to end up being disappointed. You know what I mean? I think that it's easier to feel like a failure if you're expecting to be first place all the time. You know what I mean? If you're always gunning for first place and that's it, you know, a lot of times those people have really hard times in life, and they're usually not good people. You know what I mean? I mean, like, even if we're just talking, you know, dodgeball in 4th grade, somebody knows those overly competitive people that don't handle any type of, I don't even want to call it a loss, because, you know what I mean? Like, everything's perspective. Everything's perspective, you know? So if you're really underconfident and you have like no confidence at all, it might be just getting out there, period. You know, if you just put your foot on the court, you just play dodgeball, that could be a win for you. You may get slaughtered, but if you step out and play, if you didn't have the confidence to do it in the first place and you tried, it's a huge victory. You know, and that's easier. That person has an easier time, I think, in life, in a way. You know what I mean? Like, once you get a couple of those under your belt, the motivation, as long as you see it like that, as long as you see a little victory as a victory, that can fuel the motivation and fuel the desire to keep going. You know what I mean? If you're only aiming for first place and anything else is not acceptable, you're gonna have a real rough time in life. A real rough time in life. No matter what, like that mental state is not good. And those people usually stay in that mental state always. You know what I mean? And they need to take a step back. That's real hard to do. You know what I mean? I think it's easier. It can be maybe harder to initially take a step forward, but once you take, you know what I mean, and once you realize it, like I said, as long as you're not going backwards, and sometimes you can, you know what I mean, if you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, you're still 1 step ahead from where you initially began, and everything is just perspective. So if you realize that the tiniest move forward is still a move forward, and you can realize that, be proud of that, give yourself credit for that, that's really important, and it's a better place to be coming from than the people that think, well, if I'm not ahead of the pack, then I'm behind. Like that's going to be really rough to deal with that, because that's going to happen. Nobody's winning everything. Nobody, you know what I mean? And even if you want to talk like a athlete, Floyd Mayweather's undefeated in the boxing ring. You know what I mean? But he's been married several times. He's been to jail. You know what I mean? Like there's always whoever you think has everything set and everything down pat, which I know you've referenced this before in your videos and stuff, like whoever you have up on a pedestal, they're not, you know what I mean? Or they may be in the one thing that you see them for, or the one thing that you're looking at, but overall, it's not how it is, just in life in general.
Yeah. And, again, like I want to emphasize, I don't think, Jocko Willink, I think his content's awesome. I think he has motivation. I think he has good stuff. And like you said, he wasn't coming at it from an aggressive perspective. I don't think that he was, talking down to anyone. It's more a matter of my preference, and I want to emphasize that. I don't want to seem like I'm knocking him. I think he has good stuff to offer, absolutely. And I very much agree with you in the fact that, you need to compare yourself today to yourself yesterday. Comparison is a thief of joy. I think that was Teddy Roosevelt who said that, I think. Either way. But anyway, you compare yourself to other people, and it's very common nowadays. They've done studies on it with social media, to where people will get depressed because they'll look at, everyone's putting their best foot forward. It's, oh, they just got married, they had a kid, they got a new job, they got a new car, they got a new house. And, you in general are sitting there like, oh my God, dude, like I've been in the same place forever. I haven't moved out of this apartment. I got the same car. I'm single. Like I don't have any of those things. And you get down on yourself. So I think, yes, comparing yourself to other people, obviously, and I've said this before, is essentially detrimental to your mental health. And you need to learn to focus on comparing yourself and measuring your own victories. And I know from personal experience how hard that can be. You and I were discussing this before we started filming. Today, I've been going for walks a little bit, trying to build some consistency and some kind of cardio. And I decided I was going to run. And this is the first time in like forever. I have not been hitting cardio a lot at all. And I ran for like a quarter mile and was just like, well, that's all that's going to happen there. And then I walked, in total, the whole distance was 2 miles because I walked a mile up and then back. But it's a huge progression for me in the simple fact that I was able to do that. And even though I didn't get as far as I wanted to running, I finished the entire distance, so to speak. And I didn't get mad at myself. I was like, dude, give it your best shot today. You'll do it again, and you'll build up, and eventually you'll run the mile and whatever. And that's what you got to do. And like you said, it's that understanding and really accepting on a deep level, because we can understand things intellectually. I think we all understand certain things intellectually are good, and like we ought to think this way or feel this way. It's another thing to really take it on, and I think that's what takes time. But to accept and fully feel the fact of stepping in the ring is a victory. in a lot of ways. Whether you're the one whose hand is raised at the end or not is irrelevant. If you gave it your everything, and especially, a situation like that, referencing something like that, it takes a lot of guts, and that's horrifying. So it's not about who wins. I completely agree with you on that. I think that I know you obviously, but yeah, the message is the same. I think we might just look to different sources.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like I said, just everything in general is perspective, because I mean, at the same time, you've been on stage, I'm not getting on stage. There's no way, you know what I mean? To do a performance. If I had to do a speech, I could just face the fear and do that, but there's no way. And it's not just because I can't play an instrument. I think I don't know, it would just be, I mean, maybe if I could, it would be different. But to me, that seems like, I'm not doing that. There's no, I literally would rather fight a UFC fighter, and I know I'm going to get demolished, but I would do that before I'm not going to dance on stage. There's no way. Absolutely not happening. You know what I mean? And you've done it multiple times. You'll probably do it again on some level, you know what I mean? Whether it's a party and you're playing in front of, a small group of people, or you do get on a stage and do it, in front of a couple hundred people or whatever. I can't do that. There's a lot of people that can't do that. It's the number one most common fear, is
public speaking.
Yeah, public speaking.
Yeah,
stage fright, just in general, So I mean, everything's perspective. You know what I mean? So it's that's what I think is just key to remember always. Whatever's going on. Actually, getting back to Jocko, one of his most famous clips, and I encourage everybody to go look it up on YouTube. It's called, if you put Jocko Willink, good. It's only 2 or 2.5 minutes, and it's a clip from his podcast. I can't remember exactly what the person wrote in and said, but it's just Jocko going down a list of things that you would think is horrible. And he says, good. And then explains why. He's, you didn't get the promotion at work, good. You got more time to get even better. And then the next time the promotion comes up, you're going to be overqualified. Whatever it was, he takes it back to his military thing, where he goes, oh, we didn't get all the, state-of-the-art equipment that we wanted. Good. We're going to rewrite our plan. We're going to figure out a way to make this work anyway. And it's just it's a 2-minute clip about what seems horrible and could be horrible or bad, on varying levels. If you take the correct perspective, you can see a positive spin on it. And everything's like that. I mean, it goes back to me. I think one of the most basic examples could be sports. You've never been into, any professional teams. You know what I mean? So, if, a Chicago team wins a championship, you're happy for the city, you're happy for your friends, but you don't really care. You know what I mean? I think I'm actually a good person. I grew up a Bears fan. The 85 Bears, I was in first grade. I never paid attention until then. We had Bears Day. We got to dress up Walter Payton or Jim McMahon. We got to wear jerseys. They had coloring books at Burger King. I remember going through the Burger King drive-thru to get the Chicago Bears coloring book. It was huge, huge. And I loved it. And I was a Bears fan forever. This past season was my 3rd season straight of watching zero football, because I eventually got fed up with just the decisions that they made. It was aggravating. It was actually aggravating. You know what I mean? I felt like the owners and the people in charge are just making bad decisions. So I ended up going from, that in first grade, getting into it and being a fan. When they made the Super Bowl in 2006, I thought that was the greatest thing that could possibly happen. Remember, I flew home for it. We watched it at the bar around the corner.
Yeah.
And everything. It was awesome. You know what I mean? Devin Hester returned the opening kickoff. I was so excited and yelling so hard, I literally almost passed out. I thought I was going to just keel over. I was so excited and screaming. And now, if they won, I'd be happy for my friends. But I'm not going to become I'm not a fan anymore. You know what I mean? My perspective is just changed. And actually, I look at it and I tell people now, especially working in a casino, and I work on Sundays. Now, the only thing that people talk about in football is how bad the calls are. Nobody understands why the ref did this or that. The new rules suck. Everybody's aggravated. So I tell everybody, I've gone 3 years without watching it. I sleep in on Sundays, and I got a lot less stress and aggravation in my life. I recommend it to everyone. And this is coming from a guy who spent most of his life as a huge football fan in general, and especially Chicago Bears fan. But just my perspective has changed. So if the Bears made the Super Bowl when they did it in '06, it was like the greatest thing ever. If they did it, whenever football happens again, if they make it in a year or two, or, next time the Bears make it to the Super Bowl, I'm probably not going to care.
Yeah. And we're going to get into this, and I want to give my points on that as well. But real quick, I'm going to pause the recording for a second because I need to plug in the laptop. I didn't bring the plug with me like a moron. So to everyone out there, mistakes happen, and don't be mad at yourself.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, no, I completely agree. Everything is definitely perspective. And like in psychology, one of the main terms they'll use is reframing a situation. And to me, I don't know, for myself, and I have noticed as I've gotten older, I think it was Tony Robbins actually in one of his books who talks about certain words elicit certain responses in us. Like reframing for me, for example, I used to really dislike that because to me it meant like, you've got a shitty situation. Now look at the good spots. And that's true to an extent, but I think if you're able to really change your perspective, you're not reframing per se in the sense of you're something's a certain way and you're just looking at it differently. Like you say, it's perspective. You can argue it two ways. And actually, Tom Bilyeu, who does the Impact Theory on YouTube, which I love that show, I'd recommend watching just about any of it. I don't remember who he was talking to, but they were talking about perspective and how, you can interpret things as either being negative or positive or beneficial or detrimental. And he said that for him, what it's like is a pachinko machine. And even he said he wasn't sure if he was describing this right. So I'm definitely not sure because I'm talking about him. But from what I understand, pachinko it's a game. I can't remember if it's in China or Japan, but you drop the ball and it goes off all these little things. And so he said
Japan.
Japan. Okay. He said that so having learned the things he's learned and having adopted the beliefs that he's adopted and kind of the techniques, so to speak, he's like, it's almost like a thought goes into his head and it's bouncing off all these different things that now he has in place. So even if it goes in like, oh man, this is going to be bad. He's like, by the time it really kind of gets down, so to speak, I've already turned it into an opportunity. And I agreed with that a lot because I was like, yeah, that's it's pretty much the same thing. Like the more that I've learned and the more that I've been able to put certain techniques and beliefs into play. And, I reference this all the time, but I think with, especially with depression or anxiety, the biggest thing or one of the biggest things is being able to change your beliefs. Because I think in most cases, the belief is something at the very least I can't do this. I'm not able to do this. It's too much. If you get larger, I'm not good enough. And to me, until you're able to change that core belief, you're going to have a very difficult time. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, you know this, but I mean, you're talking 8+ years of nonstop therapy. And I had started therapy even initially before that here and there. It takes a lot to get there. That's not to say that you need, 10 years of therapy to get there. That's another intention of me doing these videos, is that I want to put out information that took me a long time to get to and, put it very clearly and make it very accessible so that people don't have to sit there and necessarily go through the amount of time of self-reflection and, therapy and things like that I did. But it very much does come down to perspective. And I think for me, one of the things, the way I change any belief personally, is I start off with logic. Because if you start off with something that's emotional and you have an emotional attachment to it, it's gonna be very hard to break that. Like if you really to your core believe something like, well, I'm no good, that's not easily broken. You develop that belief over a long period of time. And likely it stemmed from childhood if we're getting really in depth. But the point being, there's a very strong connection. So a very simple way of changing a belief initially is to think logically. So like with the whole reframing thing and the whole everything's a matter of perspective. And I learned a lot of this from you just talking about, the UFC a lot and fighters and jujitsu. One thing I remember you saying early on was, the biggest sissy in the UFC is still the baddest motherfucker, on the street. And that's totally true. So the more I started to think about it, the more I was like, well, all right, logically speaking, it's 100% true that like it takes a ton of guts to just step in the ring and just do that. So while some people might view that person who got knocked out, and let's say they got knocked out in 30 seconds, everyone's like, oh man, he was a sissy. Would you go in there?
Nothing drives me crazier than people that boo the UFC.
Yeah. I'm
it is
every
just,
time I hear
it's
that.
disgusting. It's so ignorant. That's really what they're screaming to me. Is they're screaming on the top. They're booing. They're pronouncing how ignorant they are.
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's the thing though, is that intellectually that's pretty obvious. So I think being able to change that on an intellectual level using this example to be like, yeah, that's totally true. If you're gonna do something like that, like that's walking in there's a win, because I wouldn't do it. And then when you're able to change something intellectually, and this is different, but you can then start to get to the emotional level as you dig deeper and deeper, and that goes into introspection, which in my opinion is next in line, if maybe they're even interchangeable. I think core beliefs and introspection is the key to changing yourself for anyone, mental health issue or not. But yeah, I very much agree with you.
100%. Yeah, I can't agree more. And that's why I've really been getting into, and I've been suggesting to you a lot, Mike Tyson's podcast, Hot Boxing, because it doesn't matter who that guy has on there. He always ends up getting deep and philosophical and talking about who he was in the past and what he had to realize to get to where he is now, to be the cool, laid back, awesome, like completely different person. I think it was Tim Kennedy, I think, that said, like what an amazing person. Within one lifetime, he went from the worst person to the best person, over the matter of like a 20-year course or whatever. So I think that, like you said, like it's really hard to do that for yourself, like whatever it is, like whatever you're hard on yourself about is, like I said, probably it's the result of other things happening that cause you to have that perspective, to cause you to act the way that you do or you did or whatever. And that can be really hard to do. So like you said, I think you can either do it logically, or I think another way to maybe even just open the door of possibility to do that for yourself is to do that for other people. You know what I mean? So look at somebody, and try to figure out like where their motivation comes from for whether it's a positive or a negative action that person's taking. You know what I mean? Like there's some root cause that caused that, and I think that that's really important. I know I've told you, and I tell people, and they kind of think I'm joking, but I'm not. Like what I realized working with the public for so long is that there's a lot. The good news is there are a lot less assholes than people think in the world. A lot less. Seriously. But what there is people have ego, big ego. And they get like offended and, like embarrassed. Most of the time people are what somebody else would interpret as being an asshole is that they got embarrassed. And whatever embarrassed them hurt their ego. So that causes them to lash out and become overly defensive. And that's usually what it is. Not, like a vast majority of the time. And like I said, I mean, I've worked in casinos since 2002. I've seen God only knows how many people I've met and witnessed and then supervising. I got to go talk to the person that's upset and, whatever. So that's based off of, like the high number of observations that most of the time people are being aggressive is they're usually aggressively defending their ego. So I mean, if you see somebody that acts out and you think, oh my God, like this guy, whatever, I can't believe he just did that. At the moment, it can be really hard to do too, but if you go back and you really think to yourself, well, like, why would he do that? And or there is some sort of reason to it. And I mean, even if you go in and like you read a book or start listening to Mike Tyson, his podcast, or I mean, sure, he's got books, or even just watch his HBO special and stuff. Like he'll talk about the really rough, hard childhood that he had. So then, what the way that he grew up as a small child influenced the way that he was as a teenager, and that influenced the way that he was in his 20s, and in his 30s. And then, like he started to stop and become introspective and, figured it out himself and realized that, and you're not necessarily, you're not your actions initially, and like Gary Vee will say a lot of times your thoughts, or what you think are your thoughts, aren't your thoughts. Like you said, that whole like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I can't do that, it's better than I could ever be, I suck at this, I suck at that, whatever, isn't necessarily even you. That may be what you think is a subconscious voice in your head was put there, through some other person or people or an event that happened when, you were younger, and it caused that.
Yeah. And I 1,000% I agree with that. And it's extremely true. Almost anyone that you really get into who's into personal growth, especially on the level of your personal life and self-esteem and things of that nature. And it's been proven in psychology that when, I think, and I can't be quoted on this, but it's something like up until age like 5 or 6, like your brain, you're the most easily influenced. And in that time, especially if you have some sort of trauma, or if you have a parent who's less than adequate, shall we say, to put it nicely, that's when you take on these things. And because at that age, you don't have the mental capacity to sit there and be like, oh, well, my dad's an alcoholic and he's beating my mother, but that's on him, that's not on me, this isn't a reflection of me. Because you're a child and you don't have that capability, often the subconscious mind, or the mind in general, however you say this, the kid will blame themselves. And I think with males in particular, at least this is how I feel, if a male has witnessed their mother being abused by their father, even though you're a child, I think there's still kind of that primitive nature of a male that thinks, well, I ought to be protecting her, even though you're incapable of doing so. And the point that I'm making with all of this is I'm agreeing with what you're saying, that, like you said, some of those really, deeply held beliefs of not being good enough, they stem from a very old place, and they typically stem from other people, whether it's your parents, your culture, an event, something like that. And I agree also very much with what you said of, if you're trying to learn to be introspective, to first observe others. And I think the easiest thing would be to try and figure out people you're close to. Because if you take a situation like, you referenced with having to deal with the public and somebody lashing out, as adults, especially I think you and me in particular, because we've always both been very introspective, we're going to have an easier time, going from, oh, he's just being an asshole, to like, well, maybe this is why, versus someone who might not be introspective and, they have no knowledge of this person. I think it's going to be harder. But if you take a friend, like we've all got friends who, do certain things that might annoy you, but you're like, oh, that's just so-and-so. And when you're close to them, if you take something that like seems like, what, in this situation, my friend gets overly aggressive or something like that, you likely know them well enough to put the pieces together and be like, well, this is why they're being aggressive. They're not a truly mean, evil person. It's because this happened and that led to this. And I think that's a very good framework of then being able to be like, all right, now as the outside observer, I can see that. But now if I'm going to try to look within myself, that's kind of the next level. And I would also say that what that made me think of, a therapist told me this about 6 years ago at this point, but it very much stuck with me. And I've said this to a lot of people, and it's usually made a pretty big impact even on people that I've repeated this to. Specifically for people who are in general experiencing depression, but I've used this a lot with social anxiety. I was very socially anxious for a long time, and I would always be very in my head, like, oh my God, I'm not talking enough. They got to be thinking I'm weird, or they can see that I'm depressed. And I'd be, so worried. And I would be thinking that people would be judging me. So anyway, my therapist had said, when I'm being so hard on myself, she's like, well, if you had a friend having these worries and these concerns, what would you say to that friend? And then, of course, you'd be like, oh, I'd tell them, like, no, it's not like that, man. Like, people are caught up in their own stuff. No one's thinking that about you. And if they were, you wouldn't want to be their friend anyway. And the point being, well, then why wouldn't you say that and give yourself the same compassion?
Yeah, definitely. I agree 100%. And yeah, I mean, I actually have a bit of a kind of story, almost exemplifying that in a way. Me and my wife were at the bar we always go to, and it's the same two bartenders. We only go on Fridays. It's the same two bartenders all the time. Friends with both of them, are friendly. I would say they're friends with the situation. And a bartender walked by, called his name twice, and he just kept going. And Dawn and my wife goes, "Oh my God, me and Matthew would be mortified." And she's like, "That's the difference between people like you and people like us." She goes, "I would just be horribly embarrassed. I might have to leave if that happened." And I just said, I'm like, "Well, he didn't hear me." And she said, "Well, I know, but like people heard you call his name and he just walked past." And I said, "Well, yeah, but I know he didn't hear me. And there's only two possible perspectives you could take on that. You could either realize he didn't hear me and not care, or you could go, oh my God, I would feel horrible." And I'm like, so either way, I have nothing to be embarrassed about. People are either going to go, oh, he didn't hear him, or they're going to feel bad for me. So I'm like, either way, I have no reason to feel bad for myself. Like, it is what it is. I don't think he's mad. I know he's not mad at me.
No,
And everybody's perspective is one or the other. They're like, oh my God, I feel so bad for that guy. Or they're like, oh, the bartender didn't hear him.
Well, two things to add to that. One, yeah, there was definitely a time in my life where that would have horrified me. I would have felt terrible for a long time. Now I'd like to think I'm a little bit better. But anyway,
Yeah.
point being, the other
This
thing
was a while ago too. It wasn't, in the world we're living in, obviously this wasn't last week, unfortunately.
No. But the other thing, just to kind of throw in a different perspective, and the way I would think of it to kind of nullify my own insecurity, so to speak. Let's say, because I think with me, the worry would be like, oh my God, I just made an ass out of myself. At least in the past, I would have that thought. He didn't acknowledge me, or like people are going to think this and the other. So where I would go, whereas like you said, it's very true. The logical explanation is either he didn't hear you, or like you say, you'd be like, oh my God, I feel bad for that guy. But for me, the third perspective I would think of is, let's say someone is sitting there thinking, look at this fucking idiot. Do you really care what that guy thinks? If somebody thinks like that, do you want that, does it matter? Obviously, it's not a quality person. So that's the extra step that I would go to kind of, I've always gone there with myself personally, having dealt with social anxiety and being self-conscious. But I tell anyone like that who struggles with those things, who may ask me for advice, I'm like, let's say they are thinking those things. Would you want to be friends with that person? No.
Exactly. And I think another really good way to like open the door of analyzing things and getting a better perspective. And, like you said, it's always easier to analyze somebody else's actions. And everybody knows people that are either currently in or have been in bad relationships. And when you know somebody else, you always see it first. You know what I mean? You realize that the girl is not good for him, or the guy's not good for her, or doesn't treat them right, or whatever. Like you always have a much clearer perspective than the person who, and you could be like super close to them. You know what I mean? It might be somebody that you could have a conversation across a crowded room just by looking at each other. You know what I mean? It may be like somebody that close to you, and you'll see things that they won't see. And that's a great time to stop and really like try to figure it out. Like think like, okay, well, I can clearly see that, that's a horrible relationship. They need to get out of it. They're way better off without that person. And then if you can start to do that and then think from their perspective, why don't they see it? Whatever, like I think that that's a really good way and a very relatable way. Like I said, everybody either knows someone who is currently in or has been in bad relationships like that. And maybe even for yourself, you know what I mean? I mean, everybody's also probably been in, it's most people aren't marrying their boyfriend or girlfriend from like 8th grade or whatever, you know what I mean? Like just about everybody's got, some kind of experience. It doesn't necessarily have to have been a horrible relationship, but just something that didn't work out. And I think that that's a good way to really look at it. And actually going full circle now back to the Jocko podcast, at the end, when he gets to the relationship part, his advice, which I think is great, is that when you're mourning a relationship that ended, realize that it wasn't real. The person that you think you missed didn't exist. Otherwise, you wouldn't be missing them. You know what I mean? If it was what you thought it was, if they were who you thought they were, you wouldn't have broken up in the first place. So I mean, if you're on the end of like feeling bad about it or missing it, you have to understand that they're not who you thought they were. The person that you missed doesn't exist. If they existed, you wouldn't be missing them. You'd be with them. I think that that's a great way to look at it. And then I think too, that like looking back, like I said, like other people's bad relationships is when it's really obvious and you can kind of tell, like maybe you want to talk to the person about it, or if you do start to bring it up and you're like, oh, you don't understand. That's a huge key, I think, to use for your own perspective. The second that you start thinking that, if you're in a relationship and you don't want to talk to somebody that's really close to you about it because you think they're not going to get it, you're wrong. And get out. Because if you think that you have some magical perspective that they don't know, you don't know how she looks at me when nobody's there, like you don't know how he, how apologetic he was after he caused a big scene, or, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, as soon as you think somebody super close to you that you know for a fact loves you, that you know for a fact wants you to be happy, doesn't get it, you're in a bad relationship and get out. And you can usually, if you're looking at somebody else's, you could probably go back. And if you're not currently in that time frame where you know that they know better, or you think like, how could they possibly not? That's very well maybe what they're thinking. And you can probably go back in your own spot and think, oh shit, I should have seen it. Like that's usually a pretty good red flag. When you don't want to talk to the people closest to you that have your best intention at heart, it's a good time to get out. And like I said, like, it's just a good way to kind of think about things. So if you can do that with relationships, you can do it with actions too, kind of, you know what I mean? You got to like just backward engineer things. And then once you discover it, then you can go, oh, okay. And now you can either most, like habits or deep thought patterns or whatever aren't going to just go, oh, now I understand, and boom, you're done. But once you identify it and you identify the source, more importantly, you can start to ease yourself out of that. You know what I mean? And start to kind of get away from it. And then that's a way to grow as a person, make better decisions or act in a better way, just deal with things, process things in a better way.
Yeah. And just one thing to interject or add to, I should say, the relationship issue is, sadly, like you say, we've all had friends we've seen in bad relationships. And, I've had stuff like that said to me, like, oh, well, when people aren't around, you don't see X, Y, and Z. My response was, you're right. I don't see that. And that's all I should see. Like the bad things should be behind closed doors if you're in a good relationship. If that's all you see is the bad stuff and these good things are hidden, I don't think that you're in a good situation. Right. But yeah, and I think really, a big thing, obviously we're touching on a lot of different areas, but to me, when I thought about doing this, and again, I think I took this from Tom Bilyeu, but I very much agree with it. There's two things that I may be using different verbiage than him, but there's typically two things that can drive us, and I think both can be useful. It's either you think of it like flow, or you think of needing to use grit. Sometimes you need to just be like, all right, dude, like I gotta tough this out. This is gonna suck, and I just gotta power through this. Other times, what I would refer to it as being more flow. What I mean by that is let things happen. Don't let the anxiety of all the what ifs play out. Just go with it and take things as they come. I think there's appropriate times for both. Sometimes you just need to kind of see what things are, let them be, and know that you've prepared as best you can. Or if it's something where, I made a video about this today on Instagram. A lot of times motivation doesn't exist. You have to just bite down and be like, there's been times, and especially, with the pandemic, we're all isolated, and isolation is proven to be bad for mental health. It's a fact. So I've definitely had times during this where I've been anxious or depressed or whatever. And I was very depressed on Monday, and I accepted it because sometimes it's what you got to do, at least in my experience. Sometimes you're not going to be able to fix it. Sometimes it's going to be like, you know what, this is going to be a shit day. I'm going to have to get up and try tomorrow. But the issue was, so on Tuesday when I woke up initially, my thought was, you know what, let me take another day to lay low, and then maybe I'll feel better Wednesday. And I had to be like, no, fuck that. I don't care. You're going to do what you do. You're going to do, I start off my days with Wim Hof breathing, which I might as well be his salesman at this point.
You know what? Just real quick, I set a personal record. So remind me, you just reminded me, I'm going to text you a screenshot. I was very proud of myself today.
Okay. So I started off with that, like I pretty much always do no matter what, but I put the thought in my head immediately. I was like, you're doing that, then you're doing yoga, then you're going to do something productive. And that's not very specific. So, like I say, I'm not saying it doesn't have to be something so dramatic, and especially depending upon how you feel. If we're talking about something with depression, I'm not saying you got to be like, all right, well, we're going out for a 10-mile run and we're going to get done everything on our to-do list. That's not the point. But the point being is that was a situation where I had to utilize grit. And instead of giving into my feeling of, you know what, I'm just going to take it easy, as much as that was appealing and I wanted to do that, I knew that it would be worse. And, initially I had to really just mentally push myself like, nah, man, you're going to fucking do this. And then I was lucky enough that day to where it built momentum, and, now it got my week going. I'm good to go.
Yeah.
That's not always going to happen, unfortunately. Sometimes you're going to have to push more than one day. And when it becomes something like that, that's when I think you need to just kind of have it measured. All right, well, every day I'm going to do this for 10 minutes. And then as you progress, it goes on.
Definitely. And that's what, too, like going back to, like when we've talked about working out and diet and stuff, like my advice is always just like start slow, obviously, and you have to force yourself for about 3 weeks. You know what I mean? At that point, you'll start to feel better. And then once you get to the point where you feel better, it makes it easier. You're still going to have those thoughts of, I don't want to, or let me just, eat this or whatever. Just the other day, because I bought some ice cream. I like ice cream. I usually only eat it on like Friday nights, because the other thing too is I've been eating so well for so long. If I have a bunch of ice cream and I'm going to work out the next day, I feel like shit.
How often do you have ice cream? I'm just curious.
I've been lately like once or twice a week, like Friday, Saturday. If I have a little, I might have.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I seriously, I've been meaning to ask this forever and I always forget. Prior to the pandemic though, like what was, say, your average? Would you do it like once a week, once a month, once every other month?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Because I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was very sporadic. Like I don't even think you were going once every other month.
No, I would buy some maybe once. I don't know. It's hard to say. Once a month to like once every 3 months, and yeah, like you said.
See, that right there, that is insane to me. And it's a great thing. But for you to be like, yeah, once a month to once every 3 months, that blows my fucking mind. Because every week I'm like, all right, dude, you're only messing up one day. And if I only mess up one day, I'm like, oh, look at that. That was awesome. And then I talk to you and you're like, hey, when did you have ice cream? Like, yeah, 180 days ago. You know, shit happens. And I'm like,
Well, yeah, but I was gonna say though too, like usually like buying it, if I buy it, it's not gone in one sitting.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Because usually too, what I'll do is I buy like the little gelato things. I don't even know what size it is, but not the big one. I usually don't buy the big ones because number one, if it's always there, then I'm probably gonna always eat it.
right.
Um, I eat I work out enough and hard enough and I eat good enough long enough that I feel the actual difference,
Yeah.
which is also what I was getting back to. You know, like I said, if you push yourself, you know, like there's a lot of times, especially when like, you know, the world's normal. I work at night, you know, I may not go to sleep until 2, 3, 3:30 sometimes in the morning. If I don't go to jujitsu in the morning class, I can't go because I'm at work when the evening class is going. A lot of times I don't want to get up. I don't want to go. You know what I mean? Until I'm there. Once I'm there, I love it. And I feel so good afterwards. And that's a lot of times what I have to use to get myself out of bed to get there in the first place is knowing how good I'll feel if I go and knowing how shitty I'll feel physically and mentally if I don't go. You know, and then
Yeah.
that's what that is, you know what I mean? If you do things that are positive and you do it to a point where you feel the positive after effects, then it's going to make it a lot easier to get you to do it in the first place when you don't necessarily want to. You know what I mean? Because you can look back and go, I don't really want to do this, but I know how much better I'm going to feel if I do. Or I know how horrible I'm going to feel, whether that's physical, mental, or a combination of both, if you don't do it. You know, so that's kind of what that is. And yeah, you know what too? I mean, as far as the ice cream or whatever else, my internet friend or whatever you want to call him, Tate Fletcher, that I also, you know, talk about a lot. He's got a lot of like really good positive stuff too.
I was gonna say I've seen some of the stuff. You've tagged me in some of
Yeah,
the stuff.
yeah, I'll tag you every once in a while. He's more on like Instagram stories now than just like the regular posts. But yeah, he's a great guy personally and very motivational. But I was listening to a podcast that he did, and it was like a nutrition seminar kind of thing. Him and his friend Keith Jardine, who's a former UFC fighter, also were doing. I think in like the gym they own or whatever. But I remember Tate talking about. And he at one point was on like, I think he did like crystal meth when he was like in his late teens and like early 20s and smoked cigarettes. And like, I mean, he was in all kinds of shit.
Oh yeah, crystal meth is heavy.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, but so he was talking about like the slow evolution also of like getting healthy and eating healthy. And he said that he was at the point where a cheat day for him was sweet potato fries. And at the time that I had heard this, I don't even know if I had attempted like to avoid gluten just to see what would happen, or if it was like right around that time. It was probably right around the same time, either just before or just after. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like that would be amazing. I couldn't even imagine that. That was like Yoda level Jedi shit to me. You know what I mean? To go like sweet potato fries is a cheat day. What do you? That's ridiculous.
Literally,
it's unattainable.
No, I was gonna say literally like if I make sweet potato fries, I'm like, oh, I'm making a healthy decision today. Look at that.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, honestly, I love sweet potato fries, and one of my favorite things to have. And like I know it depends. So everything is portion and timing
Right.
and all that sort of thing. But I mean, at the same time, like there's a lot of things. I was just talking to my wife about it yesterday, I think, because she stopped smoking, and she's just done. She's done, and she's done more so than me. I stopped smoking over 6 years ago, and it's still sometimes the smell doesn't bother me. I don't think it ever will. It still kind of thinks. I still every once in a while think, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I'm not going to do it, and I really think that. I mean, it's very personal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everybody has a different way that they quit that worked for them, the way that they react to it after they stopped, whatever. It's completely individual. But for me, I think if it wasn't for jiu-jitsu and working out the way that I do, I don't think that I would be able to go 6.5 years without smoking. I think I would have started smoking again for sure if I didn't start doing jiu-jitsu. But the thing that I was referencing was Mountain Dew. When Dawn and I met, I was like, I drank for years, 2 cans a day minimum. Like I couldn't begin to, I've lunch and dinner every single day. I had Mountain Dew. And when I was starting to think, well, I should probably cut back, the thought of even getting down to one horrified me. I would spend most of the day trying to decide which meal tomorrow I was going to punish myself to not have Mountain Dew. Like, do you want to make your lunch suck or do you want to make your dinner suck? And, like it took a while of like doing that until I just got used to it. And then it wasn't a big deal anymore. You know what I mean? And then I went from drinking coffee, water, Gatorade, Mountain Dew, Coke, Pepsi, whatever, just sugary shit plus water every great once in a while. And coffee, I just replaced the water, or replaced the, sugary, pop or Gatorade or whatever it was with water, started tricking myself and then just became used to it. And then I would go, okay, well, now I'm going to only have one every other day. And then that was horrifying to take that next step. Like I was that like addicted to it that I would plan at least 24 hours ahead of time when I was going to torture myself by eating without Mountain Dew. Now it is closer to repulsive than attractive. There's nothing about it. I couldn't tell you the last time I had one, and I absolutely do not want one. I can't even imagine how horrible I would feel probably moments after having it, almost definitely the next day. And I don't even think it would taste good to me. I've weaned myself off processed sugar and barely eat any processed sugar except for the ice cream every once in a while. But it's still not like the main ingredient. Yeah. That I would be like oversensitive to it. And it just literally doesn't even appeal to me. I don't want it. I don't, at this point, I don't not have Mountain Dew because it's gonna, like, I'm just being disciplined. And I'm, like doing a Jocko thing of, like, don't do it, like just,
down.
Muscle through it. I just literally have evolved, I guess, or whatever, as far as the way that I eat, that it just doesn't even appeal to me anymore.
Yeah, no, and it's crazy because at least, I'm not where you are by any means, but it's more, it makes a lot more sense to me. You've been gluten-free longer than I have, but now there was a time when like I missed it terribly and I thought it was, one of the hardest things ever. And now I wouldn't do it just because like I know how bad it's going to make me feel. I'm like, not worth it, not even close to worth it. There's that. And then even lately, and again, I'm still in gradual steps, but I've been drinking a lot less pop. I try to stick to 1 can a day. Sometimes it ends up being 1.5, but there are a lot of times where I'll be like, that's too much. Like this is too much sugary garbage and I'll just get rid of it. Whereas there was, like you say, before I'd be like, no way, man. Like I got to have pop with, it's not that I don't even have it. Like I said, I will have it with both meals sometimes, but it's a lot easier to be like, and I am starting to experience, like you said, that just kind of like, dude, this is not good for me, like at all. So it takes time to get there, but
I'll tell you what too, honestly, like run an experiment. And like, if you're going to try to run, or even just like walk or whatever, don't do it the day before or have one early. So it's like 24 hours before you're going to go run. And I bet that you will see a difference because I absolutely 100%. No, that's why, like, it's not even, it is kind of discipline with not having ice cream when it's sitting in the freezer, but I know how shitty I'm going to feel the next day or how much worse my workout's going to be, especially when I was going to jujitsu. I always went on Mondays. If I had ice cream on Sunday night, I felt horrible. I couldn't perform as well. It felt like my cardio wasn't as good. You know what I mean? Like it just, my body wasn't processing things, wasn't functioning properly, to the point where like I would really feel like I fell 2 weeks out of shit. Like I would react the way that I would if like I did nothing for like a week or two, which it might not sound like a lot to people, but if you're in decent cardio shape, cardio is very hard to build and really easy to lose, really easy to lose, and that's what I would feel like. So if you start doing that, the same thing with the gluten, like you said, like, yeah, things taste good. And I understand that, you know what I mean? Like they're, like regular pizza, depending on where you get it from, is delicious. Right. You know what I mean? It can be, but it just, the horrible effect of what I would feel physically if I just sat down and said, you know what, screw it. We're getting, deep dish or, whatever it is. I'm just going to go out and I'm going to have it and I'm going to just, let go. And I would feel so horrible. And especially if I didn't take charcoal and I did it. And now I take charcoal to like prep myself. If like, I'm like every once in a while I'll have something, I'll take charcoal before and after, and it greatly mitigates the effects. I have like some minor effects, but not bad. But if I did nothing, I would feel horrible for probably 2 or 3 weeks. And it's just simply not worth it. And I think the best way to try to describe that to somebody who's watching this going, you guys are out of your fucking minds. There's no way I'm not drinking pop or I'm not eating, pizza, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be, but sugar is probably a big one. And it is literally an addiction. It lights up the same part of your brain as cocaine. You can look that up, and wheat gluten activates the same part of your brain that heroin does. Not to the same degree, but they do. Think of almost everybody has something that either, like a liquor that you're in high school or whatever, and you drink way too much of. And now if you smelled, for me, it's gin. I got wasted drinking gin one time when I was like 15. It was extra dry gin. I don't even like to smell gin to this day. And I'm going to be 41. And I still don't want to smell gin. Everybody has like an alcohol or maybe a food that you ate and you got food poisoning, or you just ended up having a stomach flu, or maybe you ate, then you drank, then you got sick, whatever it is. If you ate something and it made you got sick, you threw it up, that food automatically becomes unattractive to you, like ever again. You know what I mean? Like all the great times you had eating Taco Bell or whatever, eat Taco Bell and then get sick, you're not going to want Taco Bell for years, if ever again. And then that's sort of what this does too, just in on a slightly different scale, but in a similar manner. You know what I mean? If you've been away from something long enough and then you realize that, so going way back now, because we just both kind of rambled on and got off the track a little bit here, but you can use that motivation if you've done something long enough to actually realize the positive effects of it, even on those days when you don't want to do it, because just because you realize the positive effects doesn't mean it just becomes easy and you look forward to everything. Like I said, I still don't always look forward to working out. Whatever. Like I said, with smoking, sometimes I still think, I'd like a cigarette. I don't, not like I really want one, but the thought is there where it wouldn't be the worst thing. But, after a while, you just know that the positive effect is worth giving yourself the little nudge to go ahead and do it or not do it.
No. And it's the one thing I wanted to bring up real quick is it's interesting too, because like you say, it's the motivating factor with a lot of things is if I don't do this, I'm going to feel terrible. And it's been, I'm pretty sure it's been scientifically proven actually, but I know Tony Robbins had mentioned this and other people, just as humans in general, we will do more to avoid pain than we will to gain pleasure.
Yeah.
So avoiding the pain of like, especially me, like I'm not kidding. I think the last time that I missed doing Wim Hof breathing was my cousin's funeral back in August, because it was a funeral and I had to get ready.
Wow.
I don't think I've missed it ever since then. And I've been doing it now. I started doing it twice a day back in January. And I there's probably a day in there somewhere where maybe I only got it once, but I've never missed it. And again, it's because I know how dramatic of a difference it's made. And like you say, I'm literally scared to see what I'd feel like without it. I mean, like I'd make it through. I wouldn't die.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I'm like I said, I did a personal best today. And my goal is every day in May. I haven't done it every day ever. I do it most days. Sometimes I wake up, convince myself not to, convince myself, I'll just do it while I'm waiting for the water to get warm, while I'm waiting for the water to heat up before I get in the shower or whatever, and end up not doing it. So I'm trying to do that for sure. You know what I mean? The whole month of May. And I think that might even be why I hit the best, because what's today, the 6th? So I've 6 days straight. And I did 2 minutes and like almost 2.5 minutes this morning.
No, I saw that. And it's obviously I'm a huge advocate of that, but it's like anything else, you're trying to do that. I'm trying to aim for better health and fitness, so to speak. I think some of
And
it, some of it's personal preference.
honestly, Nick, that's what I would. I'll just tell you now. I kind of would like that. That's my suggestion for the topic next time we do this. Is just the importance of it, and then little like suggestions on like how to go about improving diet and exercise and why everybody should do that. And I mean, it really like that is the going back also to the Jocko podcast. I think he said it in the first 15 minutes or maybe just after. But one of the things that he says is that the number one is taking care of your body. And he said that, a lot of people will say, well, you got to take care of your brain. And he said, well, your brain is part of your body. If your body's not working, your brain's not working. And I mean, that is absolutely, what I mean? Like it's more and more becoming proven scientifically too. You know what I mean? All the chemicals, serotonin, dopamine, all those the chemicals in your brain originate in the gut.
Right.
So
And
I guess that's a topic for another time, but I think that we should touch on that. Like how to ease into it and why it's so important to ease into it.
yeah, and like I think at the very least, or at the very least, people need to realize it's synergistic. One feeds into the other, and
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we can get into this more in depth, but I think my biggest thing is I think you need to have a level of it. Obviously, the healthier you can be, food wise, dietary wise, exercise, that sort of thing, it's going to optimize you, and not only physically, but like you say, mentally with your mental health. For me, though, I think it very much depends on where you're at, and I think you need to have multiple things in place. Like I say, I always recommend as an easy thing to start with is just really brief yoga, even 5 minutes. But there needs to be that mental work as well. So it's balancing out both. But you're absolutely correct. It's an integral part, and any psychologist really worth their salt will agree with you. But all right, this has been an awesome talk. I know that you got stuff to do, so I will let you go. But as always, I love you.
Yeah, love you too.
Everyone.
Great time doing this. Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Until later, be well.
All right, take care. Thank you.